Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where in the world you are. My name is Tanya Sadowski, and I am the program coordinator here at the Community Solution Education System in the Global Engagement Department. We are very excited for this week. It is International Education Week 2024, and we are excited to talk about some of the things that we have planned for this week. Before we get into today's presentation, I want to just talk a little bit about International Education Week and what we do have coming up. So International Education Week is a joint initiative of the U.S. Department of State and the U.S. Department of Education. It's created to promote and celebrate the benefits of international education and exchange worldwide in an effort to promote programs that prepare Americans for a global environment. It's all about expanding horizons, making connections, and establishing mutual understanding between people in the United States and other countries. The Community Solution Education System participates annually in this important initiative by featuring globally focused events throughout the week. With that said, here's what we have coming up this week. Today, you are all here for this incredible talk, Spotlight on Tanzania. Tomorrow, we will have Oh Canada, where you'll hear from a panel of students from Canada about their experiences studying in the United States, as well as hearing from our international liaison officer in Canada about the amazing possibilities of studying abroad in Canada and all of the wonderful things about Canada itself. On Thursday, we will be holding our final information session for Education Beyond Borders 2025 South Korea Study Abroad program. If you want to learn about the Study Abroad program or Education Beyond Borders in Korea, please join us on Thursday. It's a life-changing opportunity. We get a chance to immerse yourself in South Korean culture and discover all of the dynamics of that country and all of the traditions and innovations that have come from South Korea. And wrapping up the week on Friday, we will have another student panel, a study abroad panel of students who've recently completed study abroad programs in South Africa, Germany, and Brazil. In addition to the students, we will also have on that panel our international liaison officers from South Africa and Germany. We really hope you join us for any and all of these events. I will put this flyer in the chat so you'll have access to it. The last thing I want to mention, I'll put the link in the chat as well. We do have a photo contest. So it's open, I suppose. Please submit any of your international travel photos. It doesn't have to be a study abroad or field experience program. Any photos you have from your experiences abroad, please share them and tell your friends and family to vote. Whoever gets the most votes on their photo will win a really cool little prize from us. So with that being said, again, please join us for all of these events. I am now going to turn it over to Dr. Kate Green to take it away.
Hello. Sorry, I was clicking through to get that on. So thanks everybody for showing up for this. I'm not going to speak very much because I'm going to turn it over to my amazing colleague in Tanzania right now. But I just wanted to introduce her, Georgina Harris. We were actually just trying to remember how long we have been working together and been friends. And it was pre-COVID, and we met in a world schooling group because both of us world school our kids. And what that pretty much means is think of it as homeschooling, but not being in a home. Some of us are in homes, but we're moving around the world. We're traveling. Some people are, full on digital nomads, and other people just taking extended trips or even world schooling from their home base, making sure they get that cultural immersion for their children. So that's how we met, and we just kind of clicked. And she is in Tanzania. She is the founder and chief everything for an NGO in Tanga that is all about women and children, babies that are in need. And she does all of these things like fight against orphanages. And she fights to keep the babies there's a high infant mortality rate. And so she fights to keep them with family members if mom has died or cannot look after the babies. And so this is a huge problem around many countries is these orphanages, especially when they're for tourists and people think they're doing a good job by, oh, look, I'm going in and playing with the babies, these poor sad. And, you know, in many cases, they could be with the family, but I won't veer off into that. She has a school, she has multiple programs that she's helping so many with. And some of the projects that we've done together, it started off, we have a children's book and that features her gorgeous kids, and it's all about colors, and so they can learn colors in Swahili and in English. So we have that I think that was about 2020 that we put that together. I'm trying to remember how old the kids were. Uh, so we have that. We have a teacher sponsorship program. So if anybody's interested in that, it's amazing. One of the teachers that we help sponsor and have her go through a year of teacher training is so incredible. Kelly and I got to meet her and work with her, and she's fantastic. So, you know, it's only a few $100s to be able to put these younger, you know, these women through the training, and it's just life-changing. So that's fun. Moving on to that, within Chicago school, Dr. Kelly Torres and I put together some grants, and we've been over twice now to Pamodjaleo and Tanga, and to be able to do some training on using play and gentle discipline. And we use a train the trainer model, so that we're working for, you know, we help the teachers and the staff there, and then they train the mamas, the caregivers. And we're in the middle of another big grant that, fingers crossed, we'll get that, so we can expand it out even more into the communities, and we can get the mamas out there doing this good work much more. So it's just been fantastic. And Georgina is the one that inspires us and keeps us going back. So on that note, we want to hear from you, Georgina, not me.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Kate. That's very kind of you. So if you could just, Kate's helping me with the presentation because I'm a bit tech unsavvy and couldn't figure out how to do it myself. So my name's Georgina Harris. I am currently in Tanga in Tanzania, which is on the east coast of Africa. I guess a lot of people have heard of Zanzibar, so I'm sort of on the mainland opposite of Zanzibar, just so you can kind of locate me. And it is very hot where I am, so I'm in the southern hemisphere, so it's heating up a lot. I've put down my contact email there, so if anyone at the end wants to get in touch with me, please jot that down. I'm really happy to take questions or to connect with others after this. And I really wanted to thank Kate and Kelly for inviting me to speak. For really privileged to have been asked by them. And yeah, but I am feeling a little bit nervous today. Kate keeps telling me it's fine, but for some reason I've had a bit of an anxious day, so please be patient with me if I lose track of myself. I'm following my notes. If you could push to the next slide, Kate. So I was asked to come and talk about two things. Firstly, the organisation that I founded almost 10 years ago. And Pamodjaleo's mission is to transform care for orphaned, abandoned and abused children with a focus on children ages 0 to 7. And our goal is that children grow up in families and not orphanages. And secondly, I was asked to come and talk a little bit about myself as well and what led me to this point. You know, I sound very British. What is a British lady doing in a small town in East Africa, you might be wondering, working in child protection, specifically in such a niche area like keeping kids out of orphanages? It probably sounds a little bit of a weird mix. So hopefully I can shed some insight on what led to where I am today. Kate, if you could click on the next slide, please. So a little bit about me. I'm a third culture kid, or a tick, as they often go by. So that means I've got parents from 2 different countries and grew up overseas. I put my little flags on there, so just to show where it was. And I think that was a massive part for me growing up and leading me to where I am today, is I really don't have a home. And the home I've lived longest I've ever lived anywhere, which is here now in Tanzania, which is for the last 11 years. I grew up with a really eclectic, I guess you could call it, educational background. going to international schools. And then my parents took me out of school when I was 14 years old and traveled with me around India and Russia and Nepal and Southern Europe for just over a year. And then went back into school and really kind of hodgepodged my education from there. And from that, learned that there was really lots of different ways that you could get the exams or qualifications that I wanted and desired, but maybe not through traditional methods, and which led me to go on to do my degrees, also distance learning, whilst also traveling and living in different places and working. So really the whole kind of background. I actually moved to Tanzania while still doing my kind of further education. I'm also a mum of 2 children, both by both birth and adoption. I'm the eldest child of 6. I'm a daughter and a stepdaughter as well. And I introduce that because I'm going to go on to talk a lot about family, which is at the heart of what Pomoduleo is about. And I think all those identities sort of feed into why I care. You know, that motherhood looks different to everyone. I had that experience growing up and all the different faces of motherhood. But also, yeah, the importance of keeping kids in families is something that's really dear to me, keeping siblings together, all of that kind of stuff. I think it comes from the different roles we all play. And I think it's important, as maybe I go on to talk, is that when we reflect on the importance of our own family, whether it was good or bad, actually how it does play into these feelings of belonging and identity, which is often a big part of what children are denied when they're not able to get access to families. I grew up, so I guess through all these different experiences I've mentioned above, caring a lot about orphanage trafficking. When I was 17, I was first exposed to this topic when I met a girl in Kenya who was living in an orphanage, and she had a family, and that kind of didn't make sense to me. I grew up with the idea that orphanages were full of orphans, and orphans meant children who had nobody. And when I met this, I was 17 at the same time. She was also 17. And this experience of meeting together really sort of, I guess, started a kind of a lifelong then interest and inquiry of, well, that doesn't make sense to me. And I then turned sort of a lot of my learning around trying to better understand that, among other things. So I've put down a couple of other areas there that I'm interested in. And to date, I've really built a professional practice around child protection and safeguarding as a sort of a broader practice, but more specifically through the NGO work that I do. You could click to the next slide, please. So what does Pomoduleo do? We are a small local NGO. We're a team of 13 full-time staff and generally lots of interns and volunteers, mostly local. I would say about 80% of our interns and volunteers are from Tanzania. We run several different programs, but the kind of core focus of all our programs is to invest in women's services and systems that ensure that children grow up in families and not orphanages. Our goal specifically focuses around that no child under 5 grows up in an orphanage specifically. And we do this by supporting motherhood, essentially, and providing services. When I say motherhood, I talk about all forms of motherhood. So whether that's kinship, biological, fostering, adoptive motherhood, sort of the many faces of motherhood. We provide services as well. So we have daycare, we have preschool, after school programs that are services to support families to keep their children in care. And then we do a lot of systems work. How do we change the way that children, especially orphaned and vulnerable children, are viewed within the system? How do we change the response of social workers and practitioners? And how do we make sure that there's a broader awareness of the needs of children so that the system doesn't incentivize separation? We have 3 main projects. The first one is the Baby Project. And the Baby Project works with children ages 0 to 2. Whose mother, they no longer have access to a lactating mother. And so that might be because their mother has died, or their mother is mentally unwell and unable to feed, maybe because of the medication that she's taking can't be transferred through breast milk. This is quite common, that the baby has been abandoned, or for some other reason that the mother is no longer able to feed the child, but generally it's due to maternal death. We support the child or the baby to remain in a family. 80% of the time that looks like biological family, so grandma, auntie, nieces, cousins, and about 20% of that time that looks like a non-relative. So we've trained community foster families who are volunteers that will take in children, like non-biological relatives, for the rest of the babies. And what we do is we provide milk, weekly trainings and support sessions, counselling and social welfare support. Our second program is Family First, so we work with kids aged 2 to 7 years old on family strengthening services. So this includes access to our early childhood education centre and also other forms of training to support caregivers who are caring for orphaned, abandoned and abused children ages 0 to 7. And then lastly, we have Project Hope. And Project Hope works to support children who've experienced abuse or exploitation. Predominantly, that's girls who've experienced sexual violence, become pregnant as a result of their abuse, and also children who've been exploited through the orphanage care system. And so those are our 3 core programs. You can click to the next slide. So how did we get started? Because this all sounds like a strange area of work to be getting into in a small town in Tanzania. And so about 11 and a half years ago, I was doing my degree, very interested in this area of topic, but with absolutely zero intention of starting an organisation. I was in Tanzania, bought a one-way ticket and bought a car and was driving around the country. Along that way, I actually came across 2 children that were found, 2 children abandoned in the street, and took them to the police station and social welfare. And the social worker said to me that they were going to put them in an orphanage that day. And I said, well, surely could we, why? And they said, well, because we've got no petrol to go back to the village near where you found them to go and look into the situation. So this is the only thing we've got. And as that situation unfolded, I watched as people came out and bought clothes and soap and bowls and food, and just saw this kind of community in action. I thought, goodness, people really care. Like everyone's sort of coming around to come around these children. And yet they might end up in an orphanage because of lack of resources. Anyway, we got in my car, we drove back to the village, and we found the mother. The children had just gotten lost. The children ended up going back home. And it was a series of incidences, much like that one, that got me to start asking questions in the town that I had started living in Tanzania at the time, to the government social worker who was sort of quite interested in the same topic. And I asked him, why are kids in orphanages in this district? And he said, the truth is we have no data, we don't know. I said, well, cool, can we find out? And he said, well, who are you? And I said, I'm Georgina. And he said, well, you've got to be somebody. You've got to be an organization. So there we go. Promoduleo was founded. Quite soon after that, he's actually on the board now of the organization. And together, him and I, with a bit of paper and pen, went to every orphanage in the district over literally months and tracked every child and built a profile on them. Why were they there? Where did they come from? That data didn't previously exist. And what we did was, over about 6-month period, we built this really incredible picture of what was actually going on. And it was data that I mean, in the years that have gone past since then, has really gotten a lot of attention, because before that we could sort of say, oh, I don't know why kids are there. And once we had this data, we had this sort of screaming story. And one of the things that was so important is when you count kids, when you give them a name, they're not just this sort of faceless kids in an orphanage. Once we started really creating a profile on these children who were actually labeled orphans behind those walls of that orphanage, and they weren't. Like 90% of the kids were not orphans and that is actually quite globally the same. So once we started building this picture, we got a really interesting idea of what was driving kids in. And so we saw a lot of drivers, things like the gatekeeping of resources. So for example, the only way a grandmother could access formula milk after her daughter had died was to relinquish that baby to the orphanage. The resource that was needed was the milk. The place it was behind the doors of that orphanage. She didn't want to give her baby away. She just wanted her baby food. So we started noticing there was these sort of gatekeeping of resources. Volunteer tourism. It was a money-making thing. Volunteers would pay to come and volunteer in Tanzania. Tanzania is a quite hot spot for this, but this is a global phenomenon. It then paid to have kids in care. It was a profitable model of being able to raise funds, but it disincentivized children being at home with their families. We also have things more sinister like orphanage trafficking. So when children are literally trafficked into orphanages for the purpose of exploitation to raise money. And then we also had things like tying relinquishment to opportunities like, oh, well, if you give us a kid, we'll send them to school. So families were using it as a way to access opportunities that otherwise weren't available for them. But it got us asking questions, well, why? Why did the kid need to be separated, you know, in order to go to school? These are competing rights then, and that shouldn't be it. The right to education shouldn't be tied to the loss of your family. And then we had gaps. It wasn't just pull factors, there were gaps. There were lack of services available to families, you know, who were taking on children. They suddenly found themselves in desperate poverty, you know, suddenly taking in 7 kids after the death of your sister. That can be a huge financial shock. And there wasn't really the resources available. There also wasn't alternatives at the time. So when we first started doing this 10 years ago, there was no fostering system. So there wasn't really alternatives for kids who had been abused or maybe didn't have any other opportunities. If we can click to the next slide. So I've explained a little bit about what happened, but I wanted to jump back a little bit into some data behind it. So the why, 80% of children globally in orphanages have living parents. This is a global statistic. $250 million annually is pumped into the orphanage system in Uganda alone. So that's a lot of money being pumped into keeping kids outside of families. For every 3 months, an infant under the age of 2 spends in an orphanage. Sorry, for every month, an infant under 2 for every 3 months, an infant under 2 spends in an orphanage, they lose 1 developmental month. So I've got a little graph up there looking at kids, infants, particularly those under 5 growing up in orphanages. This is developmentally harmful. They're not doing as well with gross motor skills, fine motor skills, language, social and emotional development. And according to the UN report on abuse of children, children in institutional forms of care have a higher risk of all forms of abuse than children in biological kinship and non-relative family care. So statistically, a child is more likely to experience all forms of abuse in institutional care settings than they would in families. Now, that's not saying all families are safe, but it's also just looking at the wider picture of risk associated. And then there's also the loss of cultural connection. Orphanages are not an African system. This was an import, and it really overlooks some of the strong protective mechanisms that did exist within the communities and societies and are being eroded through this sort of overfunding of a system that incentivizes separation. So as you can tell, this is the sort of the thing that I'm desperately passionate about and really spent, you know, the last decade of my life trying to work towards building a community of practice that really shifts us away from some of these older models of care into more innovative models of care. But actually, the truth was, when we started 10 years ago, we were looked at like we were really weird. This was not really something people understood or got, and that's changed massively in the last 10 years. You know, the UNGA, UN General Assembly, have raised this issue on multiple occasions. The African Union also has a task force now addressing this specific issue in Africa. It's also part of the African Charter and the UNCRC to ensure that we are investing in family care. The Commonwealth meeting in 2021, I believe it was, also specifically put a call out for Commonwealth countries to address specifically shifting their investment from institutional forms of care into family and community strengthening. So it's a global issue. More and more people are starting to catch on to this as an issue. So in short, what are we trying to do? We want to rethink the way children are cared for. Institutional care in orphanages is outdated, problematic, and harmful. It's also an imported model of care, and it undermines many local models that serve children's needs better or address the roots of what's really making kids vulnerable. We want to support the role of motherhood in all its forms. It's this huge unpaid labor of love that keeps happening. And I think anyone that's a mother could probably advocate that it's probably not the most supported job anywhere in the world. So I think everyone could do with more support as a mother. And we want to ensure that kids have that right to grow up in a form of care that is based on their best interest, their well-being, and best practice. Go to the next slide. So I'm going to start talking a little bit about the Baby Project. So the Baby Project, as I mentioned at the beginning, it works with infants aged 0 to 2, and it's a huge passion of mine. There's two ladies that are pictured on this slide, and both of them are not biological mothers of the children. They stepped in to care for children after their own mothers passed away. Can you imagine, by the look on those ladies' faces, if they were denied the opportunity to love those babies? I mean, look at that eye contact, look at the smiles. It is just the most tragic thing that even one woman that has that much love to give would be denied that opportunity. And that had been the case. What we started discovering was there was a narrative that said Africa needs orphanages because there's lots of orphans and these orphan babies need somewhere to go. When we started offering women access to formula milk after the death of their loved one, 99% of the time, especially in that first year when we started waiting for that time when someone said, no, we don't want the baby. People said yes. People said, no, I would love the opportunity to care for my child. And it was really frustrating to start to realize what a myth has been sold, what a story has been peddled that they love or care. There's this narrative, and there was a story that kept being said that people were abandoning babies in orphanages, and that just wasn't the reality we were seeing. People were putting them there because they felt like there was no other option. And so we changed the option. We said, okay, if you want to care, if you've got love for the baby, we're here to support you. So we now run these, if you click on the next slide. We now run this program where when an infant mother dies in childbirth or is otherwise unable to be fed, we support the relative or find another family to care for the baby. We provide the formula milk every week. Families come in, bring the baby, they get weighed, they get the milk. We have an incredible team of social workers and nurses and trainers who work on all things infant development, feeding. And the really cool bit is there's a community. So women get together and talk about their experience of being a grandmother again and becoming a mother and all of that. And it's a really incredible community of support. And when we started doing that, we measured the first 100 babies that we looked at. 50%, there was a 50% mortality rate for infants whose mother had passed away, 50% chance of dying before their 5th birthday. Our children in our program, there was a 97% survival rate for children who survived and thrived. And we use the word thrive because actually most of our babies by 6 months were surpassing the WHO's weight average for a 6-month-old. So these were really, very healthy, happy babies. And 100% of the babies were still in their families after 2 years. So it was really an incredible program to see how just asking some different questions, looking at the problem a little bit differently, testing out a theory. Hey, what happens if we don't gatekeep these resources? What will families say? And slowly but surely, we've developed a program now where every clinic, every hospital in our region will refer to us if a mother dies in childbirth. So we have a network of referrers from social workers to clinic nurses, all through government system, who will now refer families to us with their babies so that nobody is ever put in that situation where they have to relinquish their baby. And in the last 4 years, no infant under the age of 1 has entered an orphanage in our district because we were able to keep them all in families, which is a really telling sort of shift in practice. Next slide, please. So a lot of the babies that we work with from 0 to 2, once they're weaned, a lot of them come to our ECD centre, which is a daycare and preschool, and the children get a chance to come there whilst their mother gets to go back to work, farm, make a living. So it's a really great safe space, and we do a lot of trainings as well for families to come in and also get services too. And then sometimes even the kids can come to our after school program if there's still sort of vulnerability in the family. Okay, to the next slide. So I wanted to swing back round to our work with Kate and Kelly. And Kate says it's because of me that we started working together, but my side of the story is it's because of Sarah, who I pictured here. Sarah's a Montessori trained teacher, and her and I have worked together for the last 9 years. And she came to me and said to me, Georgina, look, I want to know more about trauma-informed care. I've got all these traumatized children that I work with who've experienced loss and abuse and just stuff kids shouldn't. And I need to know how to do better. So we started signing up for online courses. And then she said, look, I want to take what I'm doing in this space out into the community. I want to give it to the parents, but I don't know how yet. And so that's when I asked Kate, fancy coming to help? Sarah and I sort of build a better body of knowledge. And so if you could click to the next slide, that's what happened. Sarah asked for the info. I reached out to Kate and Kelly came, and they have helped us to develop loads of resources. And they first came, I'm going to say 2 years ago, about 2 years ago, and trained just Sarah and a couple of other of our direct team. And what Sarah and the team did with that is they just went straight out and they started building toys and going out into the community and taking it. And we literally had teachers saying to us, you know, I used to beat children because I didn't know any other way of handling them. And now I've stopped. I've stopped because I get it. Fear doesn't work. And it was just, and this was Sarah, a couple of trainings, a little bit of work, and off she's out there, going out far and wide. And the ripples of change that Sarah's been able to kind of create from that. And that's what I think is this really beautiful opportunity when we're able to do these learning exchanges that are collaborative and really driven. Sarah takes what she's, you know, the information and is just go out there. And one of the big things at the heart of Pomoduleo, and I think in my own philosophy from how I grew up, how I was educated, how I educate my own kids, is a lot of it's an experiment. Start small, build a small practice, see how it goes, develop and learn. And that's really at the heart of all the work Pomoduleo's done, is let's see what happens if we make some assumptions, we try and seek some data, and then we say, well, let's see on a small scale what happens if we can work with a couple of people, and do they jump on board? Okay, cool. And then what happens? And then what happens? And it's Pomoduleo means together today. And our goal was never to be this sort of top down, design a program, implement down. Our whole ethos has always been to be a bit more experimental, because I think a lot of the NGO world is about trying to find solutions to problems we've not yet fully understood. And I think a lot of the things that go wrong in the charity and NGO sector is we like to pretend that we know what we're doing when we really don't yet. So we come with our fancy knowledge and we put on our presentation and we think that's what inspires change. And it really isn't. What inspires change is people like Sarah, who take knowledge, internalize it, experiment with it, and go and chat with a friend under a tree. And then she creates a new cycle of practice. And she then gets excited about that. And then she goes and takes it further. And we've seen that that momentum has been, when it comes to trauma-informed practice, when it comes to, you know, not caring for kids in orphanages, when it comes to supporting family-based care. At first, you might be looked at like you're a bit of an alien. If you can push the next slide. But soon, this is Sarah in action, working with people in villages, at our centre, inviting people in, old and young, teachers, non-teachers. She's out there and she's not pushing an agenda. She's just working and playing with people, reflecting, feeding back, developing her practice. And I thought that I wanted to centre on Sarah today a little bit, because she is the reason that Kate and Kelly and I connected in such a deep way here. And then it's the reason why I was invited here today. So I didn't think it'd be fair to talk without giving a little nod to that. You click to the next slide. So I wanted to talk about what our major successes are as an organisation, the things I'm most proud about. But I will start with talking about the two children I pictured in the picture. That's the twins, who were the very first reason we started the baby project. It was because their mother passed away in childbirth. And on that day, their grandmother and their siblings faced losing more than just their mother and daughter. They faced losing the twins. And that just felt so wrong. And it was because of their family's willingness to try something different. And lots of people, it was all, at the beginning, we were trying to see, well, how does this work? And so they're now 8 years old. And they still come to us after school. They're still in their family. And it was kind of because of them and their family and their incredible love and commitment to their children that we really had the guts to kind of move forward with this kind of programming. I also we've cared for 191 infants in family-based care now. So it's 191 babies that may have otherwise ended up in orphanages or lost their life due to malnutrition. We've supported 289 toddlers aged 2 to 6 with family care who were at risk or who had already lost it. We provided early childhood education support to approximately 1,000 children, educated 529 girls about sexual abuse and how to report it and the systems that exist. We've supported 20 children out of orphanages and a further 12 upon aging out to reconnect with family and services. We were part of the first study on the experience of care leavers and their experience of growing up in orphanage care in Tanzania. We've mapped every single child residing in an orphanage. For the first time ever, every child is mapped in our region, and we know who they are and where they come from. We've had 4 convictions of children who we were able to support through our project, of abusers of children, who we were able to support through Project Hope, to be able to remove children who were abused by their family into safe alternative family care. Previously, our district had an 11% conviction rate on child sexual abuse cases, and every one of our 4 girls who we've been able to support through this process had their abusers receive the maximum sentence. We've worked with government to shut down illegal orphanages that were exploiting children. And we've created and designed a technology-based case management system that we've piloted in our region to track and map children who are living without a family. And we started the very first Fit Person Network, which is the Tanzanian equivalent of foster care. It's voluntary, emergency, temporary care of children. And we now have 103 families ready to care for children in need across 3 districts in both rural and urban areas. But more importantly, right now in our region, if a mother dies tomorrow, the clinic nurse will listen to the family, debate and grieve. How can I care for this baby? I don't want to take them home to die. And instead of placing them in an orphanage or sending them home to suffer and struggle with feeding a baby with cow's milk or watered down porridge, which is the options that are left for some families, instead of doing that, they'll call Abraham, who's our social worker and the absolute champion of this project. And they'll pick up the phone and they'll let him know that there's a new case, and they'll liaise with him to get the family to come to town. And they will meet with him, and he'll hear their grief, and he'll educate them on safe bottle preparing bottles safely, and ask them if they'd like to come and meet each week to get support and get milk, and that there is people that care, and they can meet other people in the same position as them, and they don't have to worry, they can keep their baby. And Auntie will get the support she needs to heal and grieve and connect and raise that baby. And the child will not be labelled an orphan, but a loved daughter. And her risk of developmental delay and abuse will reduce. She will have a higher quality of nutrition and care in her early years that will have a lifelong effect on her abilities in later life. She will know where she comes from, the songs of her grandmother, and the taste of her auntie's cooking, all things that were lost to her previously. So you see, what we've been able to do here is it's not about one person or the work of one NGO. It's about actually believing in people and systems and connecting each other. It's the government nurse that now believes in that phone call and will call us 100% of the time. And it's Abraham who goes out. Literally, people in Tanzania call him the booby man because he goes out there talking about milk and breastfeeding, breaking all social norms. He's just out there like, let's keep these kids, let's get these kids fed. He has got the highest success rate of like getting people to sign up to be foster families and just everything. He's just the biggest advocate, getting kids out of orphanages. It's about individuals who are real advocates for change. And that's what I think the legacy and the success of the organization has been. If you could click the next slide. This is pictures of my own children. And as Kate introduced, that I'm part of the world schooling community, and I've always tried to educate my children as the world as their classroom. And they've never been to school. And when I look at the world through their eyes and the way they're learning, I always take some lessons and I see some parallels between that and the work that I do. They lead with curiosity, and leading with curiosity has been the most fundamental lesson I've learned, both through my role as a home educator and my work at Pomodoro. They're embracing different forms of knowledge. The teacher isn't the person at the front of the classroom who demands that they know best. Teachers are everywhere. And I think that's also very true when it comes to the work. They're not into forcing to be learned something new. They love to discover themselves. And I think that's all of us too, if we're really honest. And the importance of mentorship and learning exchange, that's the time my kids come alive. And that's when they learn best. And I think I've seen that true in my own learning experiences and my experiences through Pomodoro. You can skip to the next slide. When I see Sarah out there in the world sharing her practice, when I learn from families about the incredible ways that they're caring and protecting and nurturing and standing up against abuse and standing for orphaned and abandoned children, that's what's developed a practice. And our goal as an organization now, and how I hope that we move forward, is really developing a community of best practice and sharing that far and wide. You get to the next slide. If people want to learn more about any of the topics I've talked about, you can connect to Pomodoro directly with me by email or social media. There's some other resources, the Transform Africa Alliance, which is the first inter-Africa alliance for Africa without orphanages, or the Better Care Network is amazing for resources. You can search on the terms that I've mentioned in this presentation. I've added a few, or you could ask me a couple of questions now. Last slide, if you don't mind. Yeah, I would love to hear more from everybody about who they are, what's resonated, and yeah, have a bit of a chat. I know I've touched upon a lot of different things, but I'm really happy to share. And yeah, that's a hello from me and my team, or most of my team here in Tanzania. Thank you.
Oh, that was awesome. I swear I learn more even after we've hung out together in person a couple of times, but I always learn so much more from you. You're such a great model. So questions.
I have a question. But first, I just want to say thank you, Georgina. This has been so interesting and insightful, and I really just appreciate how you explained your model, and just kind of breaking some of those myths and not working out of assumption, but really rooted in evidence and evaluation, and also just exploration and curiosity, and how, you know, community led and centered it is. But I'm wondering, I guess this work it seems like it's grown a lot since the beginning. So I'm curious kind of how you scaled that, from the initial kind of just ideas, and it sounds like collective grassroots organizing. And also, if you're comfortable, if you would share a little bit about like what your funding looks like, not necessarily specific funders, unless you're comfortable with just kind of like how are you? There's so much work that I know goes into even just like collecting the data and the evaluation that you're talking about, and beyond the really direct good work that you're doing. So yeah, those are my curiosities.
Thank you, Charlie. So your first question. So yeah, we've now got 3, what I would say, models of care addressing specific issues. I mentioned with the 3 programs, and it's really interesting when you look at scaling. What we realized is I think we'd lose who we were as an organization if we tried to replicate those programs in different areas. We didn't want that. That wasn't really a model of scaling that felt comfortable for us. So what we're now working on doing is recording videos in Swahili around our models. You know, so what are the ways of working? We're trying to build manuals and scaling up through partnership and working with existing organizations to help them to implement or shift their models of care. And so we've had a lot of, we just see that as a better way of scaling. And it kind of sits in line with that idea of having conversations, working through this more collaborative approach, but working with a wider audience. So we were invited to speak. I've been working with the UK High Commission. I was invited to speak and advise in some of their work on exploitation of children and really advocate for this stuff. Our team did a presentation to the anti-terrorism unit in Tanzania around how orphanages, and when you disconnect children from their families and communities, it puts them at risk for other exploitation. So we've been working in different kind of national platforms. And then we've now started inviting organizations. So we've had some people from the Lutheran Church who run orphanages in one part of the country who are really interested in shifting their model. They've come up and done like a learning exchange up in our site. And then doing a lot more work with universities to try and help create models that we can then share. So that's more of our scaling plan, is to more, not to kind of grow the programs, is to grow the reach of the knowledge and understanding in community practice. And then funding. I did not get into this work to be a fundraiser. I am the worst fundraiser in the world. And so basically it's me just like saying, please help, which is really not the right way to do it. So over the years, we've got a lot of people helping, got more trustees involved. It's mostly small businesses. So a lot of small businesses give us, small chunks of change on a regular basis, and that funds a lot of our core work. We do a little bit of grant applications, mostly from the UK, because we're also registered in the UK. We've got 501(c) status in the US, but under an umbrella organization. So we've been trying to do a little bit more with that, but I've not been that successful with that side of things. And then a lot of individual giving, people do sponsored runs. It's really hodgepodge. I mean, again, that's so not why I got into this. Was to be a fun. And so it's hard. It's also hard because it's niche work. And yes, starting to get a little bit easier as more people understand the work. We've had to often package it as early childhood education or malnutrition prevention. It's had to be packaged in ways people understand it a little bit better. So that's also been a challenge. So it's a very mixed field, but we're still standing 10 years later. How, I'm not sure, but we are.
Thanks for sharing all that.
Hi, Georgina. Thanks for your presentation. I'm Bridget. I'm the Director of Global Engagement at the Chicago School. And so I oversee and manage our study abroad programs, among other things. And Kelly and Kate have both led several of our programs as well. And one thing that you spoke about earlier made me think a little bit about our programs. You talked about the issues with volunteerism. And I'm curious because we require all of our study abroad programs to have a service learning component and a way for the students to engage with the local community, with the local organization. And as someone who is leading this type of organization, what do you think are meaningful ways that a student who's just visiting a country for a brief period of time could engage and volunteer their time and have it be impactful?
Sure. So this is kind of quite a topic. I quite like this one. I'm happy to chat more about it if I can't condense it, because it's a bit difficult. I'll start with one of the big things that I just think is a real no-no is I think short-term engagement with vulnerable people groups, full stop, that includes children. I just don't see a way of doing that ethically and safely. And I've looked at it for quite a while and I've seen people try some really interesting models. I'm not sure it's possible. That would be my first, from a child protection standpoint, from a vulnerability, I'm not sure if that's possible. But what I do think that doesn't mean, because I've actually seen a real shift in a lot of people who are trying to do service learning better, not then engaging with any organization that works with children, which is also not beneficial, because then it reduces sort of visibility and things like that are important parts of these exchanges. So I think one thing is, I think going in as a learner is super important. I think the mentality that people engage it in. So a lot of the coming in kind of curious what you can get from it, what not just coming in to help. I think it's really slightly obnoxious, and not in a nasty way, but there's a little bit, it's very difficult to be helpful in a short period of time cross-culturally. So having some kind of awareness of that, we're probably going to be a little bit helpful and a lot of a learner. And I think that tends to just change the power dynamics at play. being a bridge, like shouting about connecting with social workers. I think connect with professionals, people who are doing great work internationally. I think that's such a powerful practice, connecting with teachers. I know, for example, in my own work, like Sarah and Diana have used Kate and Kelly as mentors. I mean, Kate has like got on phone calls because of that exchange, like that exchange of professional exchange, I think is hugely powerful. Kind of set up in a dynamic. So, and shouting about good work. So going in and helping organizations to promote what they're doing, people doing great work with kids, you know, most young people are tech savvy nowadays. Help build social media campaigns and use seeing yourself more as that bridge between great work, great people doing amazing things, and your privilege to be there and experience and see it and then shout about it. Like, spotlight on what's going on. I think that tends to be really helpful stuff that I've seen, especially on a short-term basis, because there's benefit to both sides. And I think that's also really important. Volunteer tourism, when I talk about it specifically, it's these paid for opportunities which it shifts the dynamics at play. So you've got across, you know, Africa and Asia, organizations that solely exist because people are paying to come. The work is not needed. I mean, I literally watch in the village, a couple of villages away, the same school being built for 10 years by the same university group that comes over from the US for 10 years. And the wall gets built up and then it comes down again and then it's rebuilt by the next group. I mean, it's nuts. And these are the kind of volunteer tourism stuff that I'm kind of, there's a lot of negative sides of some of that. So I think it's being really aware of the type of opportunity. Is it a great NGO doing great work independently with local people solving a local problem? If that's happening and they're asking for different, you know, I've had groups come in and just sort the donation cupboard and label everything. It's boring work. And through doing that, maybe a social worker goes and sits with them and then they ask questions. And then there's that kind of spreading of information. And then he shares his practice with them and asks them to go and write a story about it on Facebook or Instagram, you know, and something like that. That's been really beneficial, those kind of exchanges. And the last one I'll say, one of the best volunteers we ever had trained our entire team on how to use Microsoft Excel. And we still use it today for our data analysis work. And they came for 6 weeks. That's all they did. And I tell you, that is the most impactful thing that's ever happened to us organizationally. So that was another one.
Great, thanks. I appreciate it.
I have a question, comment, and a bunch of stuff. Awesome. Spectacular. Great work. You seem to highlight the team a lot. You seem to deserve a lot of praise. So applause to you. Spectacular. Your passion is wildly infectious. It was a beautiful presentation. That was awesome. Presentation isn't the right word. That was awesome telling of your story. I have interests of doing something similar. I don't know what. What are your lessons learned through the process? I've worked with groups that are already formulated. And I've been beneficial in that, but I'd like to be a Georgina at some point. What lessons learned do you have from like starting off that you're like, man, I wish I did this differently, or this would have saved me, whatever. What tips do you have for somebody starting?
So I think I've got a little jaded over the years, but I think that's a good thing. And I think go and speak to the jaded people because us and we congregate, complain together. And I think I was too bright-eyed at one point, and I thought, oh, they're just being negative and cynical, and they weren't. They had some really great wisdom, and I think that's super important. And I know that might sound like really weird advice, but listen to the people because they really are telling you something interesting. I think there's a really interesting dynamic, you know, the NGO world as a concept. I think really getting critical or clear about the pros and cons of it, because is that the best vehicle to do what you want to do? I think that's a really important question to ask yourself. You know, just because you want to do something in social change or addressing social issues, is an NGO charitable model the best model? I think we should all be asking that question a little bit more. And I speak to so many founders who, you know, 10 years down the line are questioning that. I've actually seen most that I speak to, especially on grassroots work, is there other models that we can use? So I think that's one thing. It's not necessarily one right answer to that, but I think it's an important question. I think my biggest learning has also been, start small, ask questions, and this experimental model. My biggest bugbear with the charity sector is people write these beautiful programs, they get them funded, they go out to do them, and it is totally irrelevant. And the cycle of, that's why I say when I critique the NGO model, it's funding based. There's these cycles of ends, but did it end? Are we fudging numbers to give us nice reports? I mean, I've lost funding because I won't fudge a report. So you've got to get really clear. Why are you doing it? What matters? Because once you're in the NGO world, it's a beast. It sounds nice from the outside, like people are doing good work. No. There's people making careers and lives and livelihoods out of it, and people want good numbers too. And I really fight back against that, because I think what is more important is creating a good practice, and saying we got it wrong and we don't know is one of the biggest reasons problems persist, because non-profits are not socially accountable, they're donor accountable, and that's an issue. And so thinking that way before you start and really having a strategy on dealing with that, I didn't realize that when I was, again, a bit naive. And I thought, oh, grants want you to do good work. And they'll be so mad when you tell them what's happened. No, wasn't the case. So I think that was that's a big part of it. And then I think lastly is mentor up, get involved in lots of different kind of conversations and groups that are having this kind of, and a widespread of it, because I think there's a really important kind of lessons to be learned. People at different stages in the cycle, people from different parts of the world. I think I've learned most through mentorship as well. Those are
Sure. So it sounds like recognize the humanistic, the sad humanistic aspects of the situation, and then just collaborate, do that. Speaking of collaboration, is there any help you need abroad, not directly where you're at? What type of support might be beneficial from elsewhere?
Sure. So we do engage with students and volunteers, but because we're such a small team, sometimes it's a little tricky because that takes management as well. Sure. So that's not always have the capacity, even though we need more capacity, but the capacity to handle stuff, if that makes sense. A lot of the time, so we've got a profile on a website called Ompracash, which we do post opportunities as and when they come up. So if you look up Ompracash and then Pomoduleo, you can see some sort of volunteer opportunities. I don't know if I've got any open at the moment. But also following us on social media, spreading the word, having conversations, reaching out, and send me an email and be like, I really love this part of the program. I think there's a lot of need to connect. We're a small organization and we're passionate about our practice, and we're pretty terrible at telling people, overseas about it, like for the funding side of things. And so when people are overseas, being a little bit of that bridge is really a helpful thing. That we always need people to kind of support. In the past, I've also had a lot of social media volunteers, which is really quite nice because they just take over our Instagram and start running with posts. That's often a way people internationally help. But yeah, drop me an email if you've got an idea in mind ever. I'm really quite open to a chat and a Zoom call and seeing, if there's a good fit.
Awesome. Thanks again for what you're doing. Keep it up.
I think we have 1 minute left. Anybody else?
What's next?
For me or for this presentation?
I guess, I don't know. I was just filling the gap, but yeah, what's what's ongoing?
Work-wise, so we are very much business, keep running the models, keep connecting. We've got a massive Christmas campaign coming up. So half the funding for the baby project is raised over Christmas because we get a match donor. So they are matching our money, but we have to raise a certain amount of money in a small period of time. So that's my next big job because that dictates how much of the baby project we can run for 2025. So that is probably my biggest focus of the next part of the year. And then in the new year, I am actually going to Cambodia with my 2 kids to take them on a little learning adventure. So I'm very excited about that. That is my, I want a break.
We
Enjoy.
also have a little one to get through school to be sponsored. Yes,
Yeah.
Georgina, a 5-year-old that the father.
Had a donor
Are you?
who was going to help kids go through private school. So Hope Project, we have some children who are in the Hope Project, so they tend to come from extremely vulnerable backgrounds, generally backgrounds of abuse. And I have somebody that usually funds all the children, and this year they've not funded one of them, which I'm like, ah! So that's also, I contacted Kate about that, because I was like, Kate, I'm freaking out because, you know, the crazy thing about being so grassroots is it becomes really personal. Like, these are kids you know super well. It's really quite tricky. So that's another thing I'm trying to do, is raise money very fast, because I've got to roll her like next month, and the donor pulled out like last week.
I got my mother working on it too. It is a family. It pulls you in very much. But if anybody knows any groups who are looking to sponsor a child, because it would be nice to get this long term. I'm speaking for you, Georgina. I don't know, but I've listened to you enough so that we can, you know, keep this ongoing. Would be easier. We had sponsorship from an honor society through a different university, but they seem to have, I don't know, fizzled out or something. So, but if anyone's got ideas, it's not very much.
Yeah.
What is it? $350 a year?
$350 a year. Yeah.
Yeah.
But for primary school education is 8 years. And she is just the best kid as well. She's going to thrive in school. So I really don't want her to lose that opportunity. Just bright as a button. So that's a hard one. That's what I'm working on. And the Christmas campaign. And yeah, my trip to Asia. It's exciting.
Oops, I was going to try and go back to the slide with your contact, but anyway, it's not working. But if anybody wants to reach out, Dr. Kelly Torres or myself, I'm under Dr. Catherine Green in Chicago School. Our emails, feel free to do that, and we can put you in touch with Georgina if you didn't catch it. But Pamoja Leo is easy to find on. They have a great website.
Georgina, I cannot thank you enough. Thank you so much. As Brian said, inspiring, infectious passion that you have. Thank you so much for joining us today. Keep up the outstanding work. And I'm sure, I have a feeling some people will be in touch with you. So thank you again. Thank you all for attending today. And please join us for some of our upcoming events for the rest of the week. With that, I'll say goodbye. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.